Hi, this is Natalie Pace. I'm going to be joined by Lawrence Yoon. He's the chief economist of the National Association of Realtors. He's been in this industry quite a while and he's got a pretty good real estate crystal ball. So we'll be asking him a lot of questions pertaining to where he sees real estate going. Thank you, Dr. Yoon, for joining me.
Hello, Natalie. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's wonderful to see you again. Well, we have so much to discuss. I have a question for you. Last year, 2020, was one of the most challenging economies that we've seen in our lifetimes. It was a 3.5% contraction in GDP. And yet, real estate prices went crazy. In fact, you probably know the exact number, how high they went up, but that was a pretty record year for real estate, wasn't it?
It was quite a surprise. So during the initial months of a lockdown, tremendous amount of concern among real estate professionals. People are not viewing homes. People are locked in at their home. What's going to happen to the real estate? Considering the foreclosure crisis of 10 years ago, is
Mhm.
it going to be a repeat? What a surprise that once the economy reopened, the buying activity surged such that the second half of home sales were running higher than pre-pandemic levels. And then home sales increased, 7-8% nationwide on a year-over-year basis. But the prices are still running very strong.
So is this too hot? Do you think that 2021 will be somewhat more abated because of the heat of last year, or are the fundamentals behind it, the strong demand, particularly by millennials, lack of availability, are these still going to push prices higher in 2021?
There is a sense of a very heated market given the shortage of listings. In fact, we have a record low listings, down 30% in the latest month from 1 year before. So these are the largest annual declines in inventory. Consequently, multiple offers are becoming quite prevalent and prices are shooting up. The latest data showing 15% price appreciation from 1 year ago. So these are very heated market condition. And the answer or the cause is very simple. We don't have enough supply. So
Right.
if we can bring more supply to the market, it will tame some of the price growth that we have been experiencing.
Do you think that some of this pent up or lack of availability has anything to do with the moratoria on rentals, evictions, and foreclosures?
Yes. So first, related to the mortgage forbearance, this
Yeah.
is a program where homeowners who are facing economic hardship, maybe cannot find job, they are given permission to skip on their mortgage payments. And during this time, they will not be listing their property. So roughly 2.6 million homeowners are in the mortgage forbearance program. And generally, one is looking at maybe 10% of homeowners, just even in a normal economy, will
Hmm.
list their property, but people in the program are not. So we are missing roughly 260,000 homes that could be on the market but are not. So maybe as the mortgage forbearance period begins to wind down, that we will begin to see more inventory. And the second source is that many elderly population who may wanted to move maybe to a retirement home, or maybe they wanted to go to Florida as a new residence. They did not want strangers visiting their home. But now with the vaccine making progress, maybe
Hmm.
some of the elderly households would also list
Interesting.
their homes.
Okay. Okay. Now, the date that I last saw was September 30th for the end, perhaps, of this forbearance period. Is that still the date that you think is bearing up, or you think that might be extended, or?
It's possible that it could be extended if the economy do not make a strong progress, because the Biden administration is much more sympathetic about people able to
Yeah.
keep their home. And certainly, we don't want people to be forced to sell their home. But now with the jobs coming around, albeit slowly, and with a vaccination and maybe herd immunity in the second half of the year, more jobs. So maybe people can go out of the mortgage forbearance and begin to do their normal residential movement from changes in life circumstances. The school
Right.
district, they get married, some people get divorced, unfortunately, but all
Right.
these are sort of life-changing events that leads to home sales.
Okay. So are you seeing any red flags? I mean, we certainly saw a boatload of red flags prior to the Great Recession. Are you seeing anything like credit quality, ARMs, over leveraged homeowners, homeowners that are speculating, or even is how unaffordability might be playing into this?
It's good news that we don't have those funny mortgages of 10 years ago, the subprime lending that
Yes.
overstretch people's budget. And as you mentioned, adjustable rate mortgage resetting at higher rates and people simply cannot afford. So most people, I mean, over 90% are taking out a 30-year fixed rate mortgage.
Hmm.
Furthermore, the credit quality, that is to say, average credit scores are one of the best, and hence that I don't see a trouble on the mortgage front other than say the long job loss. It's a persistent job
Hmm.
losses could lead to some foreclosures, but the demand is so strong, any distressed property that comes onto the market, I think will be easily picked up by ready buyers who are in the market today.
Do you see people getting out over their skis? I mean, we have such a large percentage of first-time buyers. I'm just wondering if they're devoting too much of their budget to the homeownership, and do you think that could be a potential issue?
From the lender's perspective, they are not making loans that overstretch people's budget. So people do
Okay.
have to stay within budget. We are aware that many younger generation, they are getting help from their family members, whether mom, dad, or possibly a rich uncle who is able to help on the down payment. So current the lending environment is people are not permitted to overstretch, and that's a good uh, development over the long haul. But at the same time, people who are only reliant on their own resources, I mean, they're having tough time trying to get into the market.
Now, is there anything that could shift this? I mean, we've talked a little bit about, that there still is a high unemployment rate, and certainly when you factor in the people that are no longer participating in the marketplace, it even becomes higher. But what about, is there anything that could start to push mortgage rates up? I mean, these people that have locked in the fixed are in great shape, and that looks like that's 90%. But could it impede future sales if mortgage rates go up? And what could possibly push them up when we've almost guaranteed that the Fed fund rate is going to remain low for at least a couple years?
The Federal Reserve does control the Fed funds rate, and,
Yeah.
and, and it has indicated that it wants to keep it low level, the lowest possible point for the next 2 or 3 years. However, mortgage rates, Federal Reserve does not directly control. It's influenced by many, many factors, including inflationary expectation, how the 10-year bond yields are moving, the Treasury government bond borrowing rate. And what we have seen is that mortgage rates have already jumped up in recent months. So
Hmm.
absolute low was back in December and January, where it was averaging 2.7%. Now it is above 3%. So it's
Okay.
already inching higher because stimulus is not a free money. People are getting $1,400 check. There's more spending possibly for infrastructure spending later in the year. So stimulus is not free. It's larger budget deficit, higher national debt, partly by printing of the money. And hence the bond investors are getting a little nervous. So mortgage rates are rising. Now, fortunately, the increases have been in the decimal points. But if
Right.
somehow the bond investors lose confidence and say, consequently, mortgage rate rise to say 4% before the year finishes, I
That's
would
a
say that
danger.
will choke off a sizable demand for home buying.
That's and is Well, let's talk about things that could spook bond buyers. And the biggest one that I can see, you probably have a few more that you could point out as well. We do have a negative outlook by Fitch on our AAA rating. Do you see that as a potential, or what other things? I mean, it's hard to think of inflation when we see so much trends towards deflation in a lot of things outside of the housing market. What are you seeing as possible things that could spook bond buyers?
Well, inflation will be rising. In fact, in the early months of the pandemic, inflation essentially went down to zero, no inflation. And now inflation is picking up to 1.7%, partly due to rising healthcare costs. We saw some of the increases in price of automobiles. And the rental rate of apartment rents, which has sunk very low during the pandemic, early months of the pandemic, are now beginning to climb out again because many younger generation who went straight to the parents' basement during the pandemic now are seeing job creation, and now they are itching to get out. So rental demand is beginning to pick up, hence the rents are rising. So latest data on the consumer price inflation is 1.7%. I think it's going to cross over to 2% line before the year ends.
Okay, so that could push up. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about what you were talking about, the basement, because I was looking at your new report on the trends, real estate trends, and I saw a number that jumped out at me, and I'd also seen some data from Pew Research. So it said 18% of Gen Z are purchasing multi-generational homes, and that you are seeing a 12% increase overall on this. So let's talk a little bit about the basement, the intergenerational home, and what you're seeing there as a trend.
The interesting development from the pandemic, or the silver lining for the real estate market, is people want to have a larger size home, more elbow room, perhaps turn one additional bedroom into an office space. And as they were considering this, they said, well, why don't we get even a larger home that can accommodate maybe the elderly parents to move in, also the financing aspect where the parents could help out. So it's very interesting development that we are seeing larger size home get more attraction. Consequently, they are more expensive, and they can be multi-generational. And as you mentioned, we have seen pickup in the multi-generational type of homes. So whether this is a permanent trend going forward, or whether this will be just temporary cyclical situation, I have heard from many people that now, especially after the nursing home incidents, that they want their parents to be living in a single family home rather than in nursing home in anticipation of maybe even a future another virus breakout or something.
Wow, very interesting. And you're right. If the home prices are high, and they certainly are, it does help to afford the mortgage, right? If you have more people participate, more the money pool is bigger, the budgetary pool. So how does this affect other housing types? If we're seeing an inch up in demand for the larger homes, is it affecting any of the other housing types negatively or positively, or any other trends that you saw that were interesting?
Well, right now the demand is the strongest across all price points. But if one looks at where the home sales are clicking, it's on the $1 million home plus. Then now
Wow.
the $1 million home is fairly a thin market. It's less than 10% of the market. But we have essentially seen doubling in home sales activity in the $1 million plus. But as
Wow.
one goes down the price scale, the home sales increases are much more minimal at the lower price point, or in the very low end, say under 250,000, is actually negative from 1 year before. So one
Interesting.
wonders whether there's a change in preference, and we are finding no, that's not the case. Demand is strong across all price point. There's simply not enough inventory at the low end. Multiple
Oh.
offers are very prevalent at the low end, while on the upper end, there's actually more inventory today compared to 1 year before. So the home sales are able to click higher.
Interesting, interesting. Okay. Now, what about trends across the country? Are you seeing any? We did see a weakening market in San Francisco and Manhattan. Are you seeing that pick back up, or are you seeing what are you seeing in terms of where people really want to be? As we saw the trend out of the city into the suburbs, more affordable. What are you seeing now? Is that shifting at all?
No, not yet. So the demand out in the suburbs or exurbs are still remaining very strong. I would say there is some recovery in the very expensive markets. As you mentioned, Manhattan and San Francisco, people left. There was some significant price reductions, but now the people are saying, well, those are bargain opportunity to pick up. So the home sales are actually picking up in San Francisco as well as in the New York City area. But the overall long-term trend I see as more towards smaller towns, less expensive parts of the country, for the simple reason that I think this work from home flexibility for office workers
Yeah.
will be a new phenomena, part of the new economy. And if that is the case, people will be wondering, why am I paying so high housing costs in, say, San Francisco when I could be elsewhere? Say even Sacramento, which is not too far from San Francisco, and we have really seen Sacramento take off in terms of sales along with prices.
Interesting. Okay, so let's give you're always great at this. Let's give those first-time home buyers some tips to successful home ownership that they should be considering. I guess now we can include intergenerational, multi-generational housing may be a solution, but what are your tips on successful home ownership, especially for first-time home buyers? Because what do we have? A third of the buyers are that?
Yes, about one third of the buyers are first-time buyers. And for people who are getting in, first, be very comfortable in what the amount of dollars one is willing to expend, because don't overstretch. I know the market is very competitive. There are other buyers, and sometimes the bid offers include escalation clause. But if it overstretches the person's budget, well, just hold off and look for maybe a better time later, or possibly a different neighborhood further out from the city where things are more affordable. So consider that. The other option is, given especially for office worker, see what the company policy will be after the pandemic regarding work from home flexibility. And if there's a greater flexibility, or maybe people can negotiate about how many days they need to come into office. And then if one has a greater options, then certainly that provided more affordable options to consider. So that will be a second. And the other part is, I know that many younger generations are settled with student debt. I don't know if the Biden administration will try to cut at some of these student debt, say up to $10,000. But there's a psychological barrier not wanting to carry two large debts simultaneously, that is student debt and mortgage.
Yeah.
But also the financial barrier. If you have student debt, it makes it more difficult to qualify for mortgage debt. So try to pay down existing debt quickly as possible, like student debt, so that one will be better prepared once to enter the market.
Perfect. Okay, so let's go macro for just a moment here. Do you see any do you think that we'll be downgraded by Fitch?
So right now, U.S. debt level extremely high. But if you look at other countries, they're also in similar situations. So it seems like that
Exactly.
people are still willing to invest in the dollar, invest in the U.S. Treasury, even though the debt situation is one of the worst in U.S. history. So it's possible that it could be downgraded, but the downgrade will also be across the board in terms of other countries as well, because all countries have been using stimulus measure, running up a deficit to fight the coronavirus and fight the economic downturn. But if there's something really positive turn on the vaccine, then economy can come back close to pre-pandemic levels, maybe by end of the year. Then I think the debt level should steadily decline from that point.
Yeah, I mean, the most recent projections from the Fed were 6.5% GDP this year, which is, do you think we can get there?
That would be an outstanding figure. I have the GDP pegged at 4% growth, but we are in a very unusual time of how
Yeah.
the fast the GDP had collapsed last year and how fast we are recovering.
Yeah, this is unusual times. Okay, so you get the last word. What else do you see here? What would you like to highlight for Main Street home buyers and sellers? Is it
So
a seller's market?
uh, for the buyers, understand it is a very competitive market out there. But for the home sellers, I mean, they have been on the driver's seat in terms of what offers to accept. But don't be don't price their home too high, knowing the market is hot. Because once it stays on the market for certain lengths of time,
Yeah,
it gets that label as being somehow stale or something wrong, which they cannot visibly see. So one
right.
do not want to have that reputation. But for the sellers, also understand that the market, which has been hot, will not be hot for very long. So if they want to consider selling, maybe now may be a good time, knowing that they can easily find buyers.
Do you think that they might be considering intergenerational housing rather than selling, as well? Is that something that might be since it is a trend and maybe they're, we've had our brains so trained in the past towards the nuclear family. This is a trend I think that a lot of people are going to be surprised at. So, is that another thing to consider, keeping the wealth in the family?
Certainly, in a generational home, we have already seen an increase. Whether this becomes a more permanent feature, it remains to be seen. But many people are looking to purchase rather than remodel. Trying to add a bedroom in the basement or trying to add extended. So I think some people do try to remodel and expand their house, but most people who are seeking multi-generational home, they're just looking to buy a larger size home in different areas.
Okay, and is there opportunity to refinance at the lower interest rate, or have most people already done that and locked that in?
Most people have already done that, but there are still some people who could still benefit from the current 3% mortgage rates. So just look at what their monthly mortgage payment is saying, and if the mortgage rates are, say, 3.5% or higher, and depending upon how long they want to live in their current existing residence,
Yeah.
maybe the refinancing will really pay off.
Now, I always say align your payoff date with your retirement date. Is that a good strategy, you think, in general, or do you adhere to another philosophy?
No, that is a very good advice, because once one retire, one wants to say that retirement income is really for to enjoy life after multiple years of dedicating their life to work.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful day, and we'll get this up very quickly.
Great, thank you for having me.
Goodbye, Lawrence.
Bye.
All right, guys, thanks again for joining me. And remember, you can always watch this back at youtube.com/Natalie Pace. Contact our office at info@nataliepace.com. You can also reach us at 310-430-2397. And finally, I do video conferences at least once a month. If you would like to get advance notice and perhaps even join us live, you must email us at info@nataliepace.com, and you must include VideoCon in the subject line. So thanks again for joining me. I'll see you soon.